If your Ford Focus is vibrating a lot, like you know the change in the ashtray rattles and you can feel tingling in your foot on the gas pedal, most likely it's your motor mounts. Here's where they're located. On the upper left, this is the split port single cam engine. So on the upper left is a hydraulic one. That means there's some hydraulic fluid in it rather than rubber. That one, if you replace it, you want to get the OEM part. I've heard that the aftermarket ones are terrible and don't last long at all. So it could be that motor mount. Could be there's one under the airbox. That's a rubber one. And then underneath the car towards the back of the engine, there's this sort of dog bone looking one right here. So in my case, if I go and take a look at that one, you can see that the rubber is starting to crack here. And if I get a pry bar, this crescent wrench in here, and I start to try to wiggle it, it wiggles real easy. You can see it rocking back and forth. So in my case, this is the problem. So I'm going to show you how to replace this one. The people on the internet say most likely it's that upper left one, the hydraulic one, that goes bad. So let's take it off and put it back on. This is an easy job. You just jack up the engine put a block under it with a jack, and then we've got a bolt going through here that comes off, and then another one coming in here. All right, so these come out pretty easy. You will note that I have a jack on the car here, so I've jacked up underneath the transmission with some boards. Now, just undo these. 1, 2. All right, next we need to remove the 3 bolts, 1, 2, 3, that hold this side bracket on. And that will allow us to get this thing out of here properly. So we take that side bracket off, and just slide the old mount out. It's pretty thrashed. You can see if we look at the old one, the rubber is torn here and here, so that's definitely what was causing it to jump around. And we look at the new one, nice shiny rubber. Alright, so outside of the car, I've gone ahead and connected the bracket onto the stabilizer, and then I'm just going to slide the whole thing back onto the car in one move after that. Yeah, that works just like that. So just put the bolts back in. 1 bolt here, 3 bolts on this thing, and we're good to go. Alright, there she is, the new part, all torqued down except for this bolt. I'm going to take the weight off the engine and let it kind of lower down on here so that it doesn't get twisted, and then I'm going to tighten that up once I've lowered the jack. It's pretty tight, but it's not super tight. Now we'll see if my feet vibrate when I drive this thing. That's really all there is to it. You can be done with this in half an hour, really. It's real easy to do. Alright, here's a look at that top motor mount. So you unhook the 1 bolt that holds this reservoir on, unhook the little clamps that hold on to the hoses, and you can just swing this out of the way without having to drain it. Bolt here, bolt there, and then another bolt down there. And then these 2 nuts, and then you just pop this out, pop the new one in. So once you've gotten the top upper right motor mount out of your Ford Focus, then the problem you're going to have is the bottom of the motor mount has a nut on it that you need to break loose in order to put the new motor mount onto this bracket. So what I've done is drilled a hole into a long or semi-long 2x4, and then put a bolt through it to hold on to the bottom bracket. Put another 2x4 under here so that I could get a crescent, or so that I could get a socket into here and turn it. So then what happens is you put this ridiculous apparatus together, get it on the ground, hook up to the nut, and then stand on the end of your wrench. Longer is better, and stronger is better too. So you want to do longer, stronger wrench. The biggest wrench you've got with a deep socket. Stand on it, and then that'll break the nut free. Otherwise, you're dealing with all the twisting and just having to try to hold this with your hand, and there's too much flex in it for you to break this nut free. So that's it. That's what it looks like. And when you need to tighten the nut on the new one, just put it together in reverse order so you have something that it can grab onto so that you can torque the nut down properly. Alright, that's the new one. So I didn't have to unplug any of these hoses. You can kind of worm it down and then back up. Just make sure that you don't accidentally cut at these 2 hoses. And then just put nut. You can see down there the holes don't quite line up, but you can grab the engine and push it, move it around so that you can get the bolts in, and then you're good to go. Also make sure that you've got it jacked up high enough. If this is not touching the engine block, then you want to crank up your jack a little more so these threads are all exposed. That's it. Tighten it down, put this back in, you're ready to ride. Alright, there's the finished product. Everything's torqued down. Make sure that you put any hose clamps, like this hose clamp and this hose clamp, back on for the hoses that go to this thing. And you don't want to torque that one down too tight. You just want it to be snug, but if you torque it down too tight, it'll crack the plastic, the bolt that holds this thing in place. The driver's side one is underneath the airbox. It's real easy to get to. You just unhook the electrics here and then sort of pop the airbox up. It's just pressure fitted into place like that. And then in here, there's your motor mount. So that one you just undo that nut, that nut, that nut, that nut, that nut, take it off, and then replace it with a new one. Of course, before you take it off, you need to put a jack underneath the oil pan. So a jack with a block of wood between the jack and the oil pan to hold the engine up while you remove this one. Alright, so I've gotten all 4 of the bottom bolts loose, and I'm working on the big one now. There it goes. So my recommendation would be to use a long wrench rather than a short one for leverage, because these were really tight. And a little bit of penetrating oil doesn't hurt either. Alright, so we pull that loose. Look down in the hole and you can see that's where the middle part goes, and then the other 4 go around here. Right, you can see now that the bolt here is below the surface, so I'm going to have to jack up the engine to bring the bolt up into the hole here. And I've put these on almost tight. They're a little bit loose, so I can be able to shift the plate around if I need to once this goes through. Alright, I've got a jack under the oil pan side of the engine over there, and then I've got another jack with a block of wood underneath this side of the engine, under the transmission. So I'm going to jack up the transmission side, and you'll see the threads start to come up through this hole as I do. So I'm just going to lift it up until it's high enough for me to get a grip on it. Shift it around, make sure that that it's centered, and then I'll tighten these bolts down once I know that it's centered, and I'll put the big bolt in the middle. And while I'm doing this, I'm kind of trying to shake the engine to see if the other side feels shaky, and the other side feels pretty solidly mounted. Alright, so now just put the big bolt on the middle, tighten these babies down, and remove the jacks. Let's take a look at the jacks. So here's what's going on under the car. The jack on the left is on the oil pan, and then on the right, that one's under the transmission. Both times I've used blocks of wood to protect the metal of the engine, and the one on the right is the one I've been jacking up to get the bolt through the threads. So the bolts are all tight. They look good, feel good. When we hook it back up, remember to hook up the airbox here, hook up the electrics, and then down here on the side of the airbox there's another hose that needs to be connected into the side of the airbox that popped loose when I pulled it out. So all 3 of those need to be done. Alright, that goes in easy. This goes back on. Tighten up the collar. So the bottom motor mount at the bottom of the engine is about 30 bucks. This one was around 30 bucks, and then the one on the other side is $44 if you buy the aftermarket one. If you buy the Ford one, it's around 100. Alright, vibration check. Oh, that's smooth. I can't feel anything in the steering wheel. Can't feel a thing in my foots when I touch the pedals, and the change doesn't rattle, so we are good. That fixed it. We had to change all 3. I was hoping to get away with changing 1. I changed 1 at a time, and it got a little better each time, but all 3 were bad. So I recommend you do all 3 as a bunch. They're all pretty easy to do once you know the tricks.